And then his dad tells him, hey, since you somebody, you have now become a man. And staff eventually tells him that he has to go to his room. And this is the words they use. They say, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this, you know, the way we can do this. In this video, I'm going to share with you what it was like working in a forensic psychiatric kid adolescent unit at a state hospital. The state hospital that I worked at a few years ago. This was like 3 or 4 years ago, so my memory might be a little vague on some of the events, but it'll still be interesting, I think. So the state hospital has about 500 total patients. And then from the main campus, you kind of have this like adjunct building that is the adolescent unit. And it's a locked facility. You have to walk through metal detectors. They got security guards there and everything. And typically we would have like anywhere from 8 to, I think the maximum amount of kids was 15 kids. And the age range is there. When I floated to this pool, I was on the float unit, right? So this was not my specific unit. But I think the age range, I remember our youngest, I believe, was 12. And our oldest was 17. And I think I floated probably like a total of maybe 8 times to this adolescent unit. And I'll just real quick, I'll just give you kind of like, these kids were all, since it's forensic psychiatry, right? All these kids that were there were involved with the legal system in some way, shape, or form. And I just want to make sure that my record button's on. All right, cool, it is. So all of them, pretty much all the kids there had some sort of legal charges, right? So one of the kids, for instance, he was like either 12 or 14 years old. I want to say 12 when he perhaps committed this crime. So he kills somebody. This 12-year-old kills somebody with a shotgun. His dad finds out that he kills somebody with a shotgun. And then his dad tells him, hey, since you killed somebody, you have now become a man. Like, these are the kind of kids that we're dealing with. Like gangbangers, their parents had them when they were like 13, 14, 15 years old. They were gangbangers and they raised them up as gangbangers. Like, lots of gangbangers in there. Lots of kids that just, in retrospect, really had no hope, no shot to begin with, just because their parents were a nightmare, and I'm sure their parents' were a nightmare, etc. It's just this like generational trauma upon trauma is what you would see with these kids. So let me just kind of explain the layout of the facility. So as you're watching this video, I'm going to explain it from like a bird's eye view. So as you're watching from above. So you walk through a metal detector, you eventually have the nurse's station, which is dead center, right? Everything is like a hexagonal shape, and then all the units were like pretty much all glass. So it was kind of a cool unit. It was all on one level, but the ceilings were super tall, like probably 20 feet or something like that. So you got the nurse's station right in the middle. It's a hexagon. Then you've got 2 hexagonal pods right here that house females and females. Then you have another pod over here adjacent to the nurse's station that's hexagonal as well. That's all for males. And actually what they would usually do is this one would be for males, so this pod over here would be for females. And then if you had someone who was having some behavioral issues, that would kind of be like an isolation unit up here. So you walk in, you've got your nurse's station, then to the left you've got all the males over there, then you got all the females over here. And they always kept the males and females separated. They were never allowed to commingle. Like, even when we would take them out from their unit and go to like a little recreation yard where they had a gymnasium, some basketball hoops, things like that, it was never males and females. It was always males here, and then the females were over there. So it was always separated. So I think the first thing that surprised me about working at this particular adolescent unit was just how standoffish staff was when it came to interacting with the patients. So typically, like when I work a psych unit, I like to just walk and talk with the patients, get to know them, things like that. When I arrived at this unit, I always felt like we were overstaffed. It was crazy. Like, we would have, I feel like 6 to 8 staff. We almost had, we would have 6 to 8 staff, because I remember it was like, dude, we got like a 1-to-1 ratio here. It's crazy. And sometimes we would have patients on a 1-to-1, meaning that they would be in their room and we'd have a staff with them all the time. Like, usually some of these, I remember like some of our female patients were acutely suicidal, in which case we would always have a staff with them within arm's reach, and they were always watching the female to make sure she wasn't self-harming or anything like that, right? But we always felt like we were way overstaffed. But one thing that I found super peculiar is I walk into this unit and it's like staff was just very standoffish with the kids. Like, they didn't want to interact with them. They would always stay inside the nurse's station. It was bizarre. Like, bizarre enough to the point where I was like, bro, are we actually supposed to go out and visit the kids in the pods? Because like everybody is just chilling in here. And I remember like when I showed up, I'm like, I was just like thinking, like, is it a safety issue? Like, why are we not interacting with these kids. And I remember asking the charge nurse, I was like, hey, is it cool if I go out there? And they were just like, yeah, it's fine. And I'm like, okay, well, how come like nobody's going out there and interacting with these kids? So that's what I pretty much do. Like I'd show up there and then I would just walk into one of the pods and I would like sit down with the kids and just like shoot the shit basically with them. And as a side note, I'll share with you kind of a funny story. So I went to the male side, right? And it was maybe around, they had just eaten breakfast. So it must have been like 9, 10 in the morning. And I'm sitting with this group of males. And I don't remember how we got into this conversation. I think I kind of was trying to break the ice, asking them like what kind of music they listen to. Oh yeah, I had one kid, right? And we were talking about like rap music. I love rap music. Been listening to rap music forever. And I asked this one kid, I was like, what's your favorite rap song? And he's like, I'm not sure. I'm like, all right, well, if you had to listen to like a rap song on repeat, what would be your rap song? And he picked, what did he pick? Dear Mama by Tupac, right? It's a great rap song. Even if you don't like rap, I think you would probably like the lyrics. And it's one of those like very heartfelt songs, good beat. And it's Tupac is the artist. And he's talking about how much he really appreciates his mom. Like that's pretty much kind of the theme of the song, right? And so the kid, but it's not like your hardcore gangster rap. Like it's not like this thug is like, I'm going to go out there and pop somebody, right? Like it's more just like Tupac reminiscing about how much he loves his mom and forgiving her for any like shortcomings she may have had, right? So this kid's like, well, he's like, that's the song I would listen to. And he's with like all of his friends around, well, I don't know if they're friends, but like, other kids that are around his age. He's a gangbanger. A lot of the other kids are gangbangers. And so he mentions that, right? I'm like, oh, that's cool. And he's like, and then he's quickly like, he's like, well, not because of like the lyrics. This is what he says. Not because of the lyrics. He's like, I really just like the beat. I'm like, bro, it's okay to like the lyrics. Like it's a good song. But I just thought that was funny because like it wasn't a hardcore rap song, but he wants to appear hardcore to his friends. So he's not going to be like, well, I love the lyrics. The lyrics are great. But I just, no, it's cool. I just like it because of the beat, right? And then another kid, eventually so the same group of guys we were talking, and somehow we got into the conversation of like how they arrived where they're at today. And this one kid, I think what had happened is he had arrived to his girlfriend's house and he saw another dude leap out of her window because presumably this dude knew that he was coming and he didn't want to get caught cheating with his girl. So he jumped out of the window, I think, and I think the kid ended up shooting him or something like that, or assaulting him. And we were talking more, and eventually the kid just asked me, he's like, bro, hold up. He's like, let me ask you something. What would you do if you came home and you saw some guy jumping out of your girlfriend's video? And I told him, well, honestly, if that happened to me, I'd probably just be like, dude, I hope that you pleased her a little better than I was able to. Maybe not exactly in those words, but something like that. And then they all just laughed. It was really fun. We had really good rapport. So these guys, though, these patients were, I don't know, they just struck me as like normal adolescent kids, yet they all had pretty severe charges. But when you interact with them, they just kind of seem like your typical hoodlum kids. Like I would never really guess that anything was really off with them. They probably, if I had to diagnose them just by talking to them, I'd be like, I would probably lean towards maybe like antisocial personality disorder, because many of them were kind of like charismatic, very outgoing, strong personalities. So quick side note, like my battery just goes out. I love how with my camera, it doesn't even warn me. Just like all of a sudden I get this thing on my screen. It's like battery is dead. I'm like, okay, thanks. So I kind of lost my train of thought. I remember we were talking about antisocial personality disorder. And yeah, so like none of them, like a lot of adult patients in my psychiatric nursing career, it's very easy for me to speak with them for a while and then have a pretty good guess of what their diagnosis is. With these kids, like I really had no idea. Like when I said antisocial personality disorder, that's kind of where I would say I would like be leaning with the diagnosis if I absolutely had to guess what their diagnosis may be. But none of them just struck me with like a diagnosis that's like, okay, you're obviously schizophrenic or you have borderline personality disorder or whatever. In fact, the whole time that I was there, I think there was one kid that I remember who was 16, who I actually thought, okay, this is probably a patient with bona fide schizophrenia. And if you know anything about schizophrenia, like typically it doesn't strike. If you're male, like usually it'll strike like in your early 20s, females maybe later 20s, but typically you don't see it in adolescence whatsoever, which I guess will segue me to my next point. Like another crazy thing about working adolescent psych is when I was doing MedPass, and I'm like, bro, why are these kids on all these crazy psychotropic medications? And I guess to be fair, I don't really know their histories. I don't know what they were like before they were taking medication. But I mean, we had like 13, 14-year-olds on 10 milligrams of Zyprexa, which is a very strong antipsychotic medication, per day. And I'm just like, why are we zonking them out? Because behaviorally, I can't see any justification for giving them these meds. Like that was another thing that just really stood out to me. I mean, huge amounts of Depakote was given, huge amounts of Zyprexa was given. And then I guess I should mention something that's kind of unique about this forensic psychiatric unit was that anytime they did want to start a medication on a patient, they couldn't just give it to them. In fact, I don't even think they could give them an emergency medication without the prior authorization of either their legal guardian or their parent, which is crazy because then I think, man, all these kids that are on every single med, their parent has given them the okay to be on that medication. And again, like my understanding of these kids and their histories is very, very narrow. So I might be completely off the mark here, but just from judging by their behavior, I don't think that any of their behavior warranted an antipsychotic medication. And if you're unfamiliar, like if you're just watching this video and you don't know anything about nursing or about like antipsychotic medication, it's like very, very powerfully sedating medication with just a ton of side effects. And although it can help people with psychosis, like oftentimes the risks just simply outweigh the benefits, especially with like kids this age. Like that to me is just, it's just mind-boggling. Like it makes no sense. And I never ever saw the provider on the unit. I didn't even know who the provider was. Like, and I was there like a lot, oftentimes during the week, I just never saw a provider. I don't know if they did over the phone, through screen time or what, but never ever saw the provider on the unit. All right, I have two more stories that really stand out when I floated to this unit. And I eventually actually got banned from this psych unit. And this is another thing that I just find infuriatingly frustrating because I just feel like out of all the psych units that I've worked, I actually feel like kids is probably my niche. So being banned on the unit was like really frustrating for me because I loved working with kids. And I found out like if you just treat kids with a lot of respect and you don't treat them really any differently than I would like a normal psych patient, it ends up working out really, really well. All right, so I guess I'll just get into one story that really sticks out. So I'm gonna call this kid Bob. He was 12 years old. He was a gangbanger, little petite kid. I mean, he was ripped as shit. Like he liked to walk around without a shirt because he had a very ripped body, but he couldn't have weighed more than like 80 pounds. But he could bust out a bunch of push-ups and pull-ups, which is pretty cool. Like just shredded, but just very petite, right? So Bob, I think how the story goes is he was out in the day hall and he picked his nose and he wiped it on somebody and it became this like huge deal. And the kid who had the booger wiped on him didn't know that supposedly there was a booger on there, but staff saw him and it became like this just giant thing on the unit. So eventually I go out there and I talk to Bob, right? It was just me and him in this unit. I'm just like trying to hear him out because he and staff were like going back and forth. It was getting pretty heated. And so like eventually I got him into this own pod by himself and I'm just like listening to him talk. And I have pretty good rapport with him. We're having a pretty good conversation and just asking him like lots of open-ended questions. He's a pretty damn smart little kid, like very smart, very street smart. And eventually, as I'm talking to him, we're sitting at this table. He's sitting across from this metal table, and we're just shooting the shit. And eventually, like the security guard comes in, and he just is sitting there, or he's just standing kind of near the door, listening to us talk on the inside of the unit where we're at, right? And something the kid said triggers the guard, and I can't remember what the heck he said, but the guard told him to like essentially watch his mouth. And then all of a sudden there's this verbal exchange and now it gets heated again. More staff come in. They tell him to go to his room. And I'm just like, you guys, and so the whole situation becomes super, super escalated. And it was frustrating for me because I feel like I was developing pretty good rapport with him and I was starting to understand where he was coming from and figure out the situation and all that. And then once the security guard kind of opened his mouth, which he wasn't supposed to interject. Like the security guard, when they're security, they're just supposed to stand there and provide security. That's it. Like if there's something that is of imminent danger or threat, then yes, they should be intervening verbally or physically or whatever, but there was nothing going on. Like the security guard was literally just triggered by what the kid said because he was making some accusations of staff. And then the security guard felt like he needed to contradict those accusations. And then it just became this like escalated thing between the 12-year-old and the security guard. And I could tell that security guard was like legitimately pissed at this kid. Like he just didn't like the way the kid was talking and he didn't like the way that he was disrespecting staff. And it was one of those things where Like, if that kid was a grown-ass adult and he was big and strong and powerful, I guarantee that security guard wouldn't have said shit. But because he was a kid, because he only weighed 80 pounds, because that security guard was probably at least twice his size, probably like 2.5 times his size, the security guard felt it was okay to open his mouth. Like, that basically just sums it up. I'm just being real. So anyhow, it was super frustrating because eventually what happens is I have this kid like very calmed down, chill, like we're just having a normal conversation. He's open up to me, to then he's fumingly mad, and staff eventually tells him that he has to go to his room. And this is the words they use. They say, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this, you know, the way we can do this. Like, those are the exact words that the charge nurse said to this kid. Oh God, it just had me like, dude, I was about to lose my mind. Like, I felt like I was about to lose my mind. So that was one incident that really stood out to me. Eventually the kid went back to his room. You know, he was pissed. He just went in there and cussed a bunch, but thankfully, like, we didn't have to go hands on. Thank God, he just went back to his room. The other incident that stands out to me was we had I think she might have been 12 years old too. We had a 12-year-old female, although I think she identified as a he. And I can't remember what precisely happened, but a week prior to this incident, she had severely bitten a staff member when they were trying to restrain her. And what did she say? I think when someone was doing like a wellness round, she was threatening to beat staff up or kill them or something like that. And you guys, like, I get it. You got to take verbal stuff seriously. But this 12-year-old female, like, if you saw her, she's petite. Like, she ain't going to do nothing. Like, what is she legitimately going to do? She ain't going to, even if she tried, she couldn't do anything. So, and I felt like staff was just overreacting with this patient, whatever. So I can't remember what happened, but I do remember going on a wellness round and, you know, just to check to make sure the patients are okay. And I check in with her. And I sit down, we talk for a bit, we play some cards. And then, and she was, when I initially went in there, she was very mad. But by the time I was done and I had talking to her and I had played some cards with her, she was like completely back to normal. And if you've worked with teenagers, you know how they are. Like, they're extraordinarily, like, I was a teenager once, probably you were a teenager once. I'm assuming that you're older watching this video, but like, we all know what it's like to be a teenager. You're extraordinarily labile. That is part of a teenager's normal behavior. They're going to be up with their mood, down with their mood. They're going to be super pissed. Like, I remember getting so pissed at my parents, like wanting to kill my parents before. Like, it's normal. Like, homicidal ideation at the teenage age is very normal. Like, all that shit's very normal, right? So I get her de-escalated, and then I can't remember what happened. But the charge nurse was upset with me because she felt like I was placating her and I was aiding and abetting her bad behavior by playing cards with her. And she had said some verbally unacceptable things, right? And I think the way that I was going to tackle this was that I was going to calm her down, I was going to gain rapport with her, and then I was going to address some of the things that she said. Oh, and I think what it was too is she wanted to beat up some of her female counterparts that were in this other pod that was over here. So they isolated her into this pod, right? So I got her calmed down, and then literally like the rest of the day, she was actually with those other females playing cards with them, like doing fine. And then somehow, and I don't remember the exact, because it's been like 3 or 4 years, right? But somehow the charge nurse was like a little upset with me. And she said that because I was playing cards with her, I was rewarding her poor behavior. And I said, look, I can understand how you could view it that way. Typically, when a patient's really aggressive, what I like to do is try to build rapport, hear him out a little bit, validate him, calm him down, and then that's when I address the behavior because I don't agree with the things that she said. But at the same time, I'm not just going to go in there and be like, hey, what you said is inappropriate, which is what the other staff was doing. Like, they were just like banging heads with her, basically telling her that she can't say those things. And I get it. It's frustrating, but that's, in my opinion, that's not the way to go about handling the situation. So me and this charge nurse go back and forth. I can't remember. I think the charge nurse went in there and she said that she was going to, like, because of what the girl said, she was going to drop her level. And at the state hospital that I worked at, like, you have all these different levels that the patients can be on. And essentially, like, the higher the level you're on, the more privileges you have. When your levels drop, you have less privileges. So it's kind of a way to punish and reward good behavior, although the state hospital would never say that it's used as a punishment. But really, like, let's be real, that's the way it works, especially in the mind of a teenager. They're absolutely going to see it as punishment. So I think the charge nurse has gone in there and something, I can't remember the exact like chronological order of everything, but I think I had her calm down, and then the charge nurse told her that she was going to drop her level, and then she got pissed again. And then like the charge nurse and I went back to this room. We were talking about how we wanted to handle the situation. And the charge nurse was essentially like, look, if we need to SNR, we're going to SNR because we don't want to reward this kind of behavior. And I'm just thinking like, you're going to like seclude and restrain a 12-year-old girl. Like, do you know how traumatic that is? And she didn't even like, her behavior did not warrant it. Just because you run your mouth doesn't warrant restraint whatsoever. Like, essentially, someone can call you whatever fucking name they want in the book. They can be just like horribly insultive to you. And that doesn't mean you have to put your hands on them. Like, it's as simple as that. But this nurse came from the DOC and she had a different background. And she was like, essentially, she was just like, you know what, if we have to put her in SNR, then that's what we got to do. And she was just so dismissive and cavalier about it. I was just like, God, what is your problem? Like, one, it's super traumatic for the patient. Two, we require another staff then to sit there and monitor them all the time. Three, this patient bit someone last week. Why would any of us want to put ourselves in a position to get bit? Four, there's another reason. There's a fourth reason that just eluded my mind. But four, it's going to require like a ton of documentation on our part. Like it is literally like it should be the very, very last thing. Like if all of a sudden she goes over there and starts to assault on their patient, then at a minimum, yes, we're going to put our hands on her. Something like that, right? But just calling names to someone or making threats, that's not enough to restrain somebody, especially like a teenager. Come on. So that was super annoying. And later I found out that this charge nurse, like after I got banned from this unit, this particular charge nurse eventually got fired. And I think it was for an inappropriate seclusion and restraint or something like that. I don't know. But I was like, thank God she got fired because she was in the wrong industry. Like she had no compassion for these kids whatsoever. And I just could not believe she was even a charge nurse working with kids. And I'm like, why would you accept a position working with kids when you don't even like kids yourself? It makes no sense to me. So then something else that stood out to me on this unit was just like the staff overall, I felt like treated the kids kind of like the staff was superior to the kids. Like, you know, there's that kind of dynamic, especially in the teenage years, where some adults feel like they need to assert their authority. That's the way that I felt like most staff there, not all the staff, but most staff there just felt like they needed to assert their authority and dominance over the kid. And they wouldn't accept any disrespect or talking back from the kids. And if they did, it became this like whole huge nightmare. So eventually after I'd floated to that unit like 4 or 5 times, and I just noticed this kind of like pattern of staff, like inappropriately interacting with the kids or just neglecting the kids, I mentioned it to the lead nurse of the unit. It was this gentleman, and he seemed very nice and receptive to the fact that I was talking to him and we were having a face-to-face conversation, and I was just addressing some concerns that I had after floating to his unit and working on his unit, and he seemed very open to it, yada, yada, yada. Well, one day, and I think it was the day that charge nurse and I were having this debate. It was on a Sunday, I believe, but they sent in a nurse 3 to replace me, and they sent me to another unit in the hospital. And I've like, you got to be shitting me. All because I'm having an open dialogue and I'm disagreeing with the charge nurse. You're going to send me to a different unit. It was just like, I don't know, so flabbergasting and frustrating that, yeah, those are the things that kind of stood out to me. But I think the takeaway for me is that after working in that unit, just so many of those kids really needed positive role models. And the only time that I ever saw a positive interaction between regular staff and the kids was there was a psychologist that worked there. And man, this guy did such an amazing job. He was just like very chill. I think he might have been like a pot smoking hippie or something. But I remember one time the kids were talking about how they like to smoke marijuana. And if they had brought that up in front of regular staff would have been like, that's inappropriate. Don't talk about that. Don't talk about drugs, yada, yada, yada. Well, this guy just kind of like approached it just like you would expect a psychologist. Like he was very exploratory with it, asked him questions, asked him stuff like, what makes you smoke marijuana? What's important to you about being high? Things like that. And so I really just feel like these kids lacked role models growing up. And I feel like what they really needed was not medication, just role models. Not meds, just role models. That's simply it. And then the only kid that I mentioned earlier that I feel like had legitimate psychosis, I mean, you could kind of tell with him that he wasn't malingering, he wasn't faking. He would often kind of be a little spacey during the conversation, almost like he was preoccupied with some sort of distraction, maybe some sort of auditory hallucination, some sort of visual disturbance, something like that. But the way that he described his schizophrenia, if I remember right, it's that he saw this like black figure that he didn't really describe as a demon or anything like that, but it was just this cloaked, black, tall, big figure that would just stand around him and sometimes give him these command auditory hallucinations, like these commands like go and do this or go and do that or you're worthless, etc. And if you work in psych long enough, you'll realize that most patients that have auditory hallucinations, a lot of them are command hallucinations, and they can say some pretty scary things to him. And I could just tell with him, like, I was worried about him because it just seemed like he was so preoccupied with what this dark, tall figure was saying that you kind of wondered, like, hey, what's the rest of his life going to be like? Or is this dark figure going to torment him and make him do things that he doesn't want to do? So anyhow, I feel like that kind of sums it up for my experience in psych. Love working with kids. Unfortunately for me, it was like a terrible experience. In fact, like some of the worst sleep that I had was after working in the adolescent unit, because I just felt like those kids were treated so unfairly. And yes, had they committed, a lot of them, had they probably committed horrible crimes? Absolutely. But they're still freaking kids. They just had bad role models, bad upbringing, and I feel like they really deserved better. So hope you enjoyed that video, and yeah, we're going to end it on that.